Hi there and welcome. Thank you so much for being with me here today on my new Secrets to Radiant Health platform, both on my new Facebook community group that I hope you'll follow me on or join me in, and my new YouTube channel under the same name. I'm Suzanne Rothpaw, and I am a certified primal health coach and the author of the Poisons in Your Pantry ebook. And I hope that you will go get my free guide on the poisons that could be harming you in your body right now. And we're going to be talking about poisons in this conversation here that I'm so excited to be sharing with you today. My guest speaker, who is a dear friend and a colleague who was on my Secrets to Radiant Health Summit back in 2021. And if you were part of that with me, then you will remember her because not only is she a dynamic speaker, but she was the number one viewed, had the highest views on that summit of 20 professionals. Now, Laurie and I talked for an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half or so, and people stayed with us. We had viewers that hung on to the very end. So that's what I'm so excited about with her being with me today. We are not going to be talking that long. We're going to keep this to about a half an hour. But I'm so, honored to be having her. Now, I also wanted to talk about quickly here that Laurie is someone that I highly respect and regard because we are both seekers of the truth in health. And doing our work is truly a calling. And that's why it's really appropriate that we are talking today on Easter Sunday because we're both very spiritual and have our faith, and the work that we're doing is a calling. And we're truly missionaries of good health and wellness for all. And that's again why we love doing this work and we collaborate together so well in helping our community. And we both believe that food is truly can be your medicine or it can be your poison. And one of the things that, we both really teach and work hard for people to understand and to comprehend that we know that toxins in our food and in our environment are the root cause of chronic illness today, and why it's so important to read ingredients. It's so important to read labels and to know what you're putting into your body. And that's what my Poisons in the Pantry ebook is all about, because it's a book that I created for you because I wished I'd had that decades ago when I suffered so much in silence myself. So we're going to dive deep into what happened to me recently with a little bit of, it was a serious cross-contamination poisoning that I had with gluten because I am sensitive. And we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to dive in with Laurie as to why my brain was so affected and what it did to me for about 3 weeks now, still with symptoms. And Laurie is a certified primal health coach. That's me, sorry. She's a certified health coach. We're both health coaches. And she's also a certified brain coach. And so her passion is emotional well-being. And that's what we're going to be touching on today. And again, why we are both so in sync with what we are doing as a coach. So Laurie, Gagan, welcome to Secrets to Radiant Health again. I'm so excited to see you.
Well, thank you again for having me, Suzanne. I've got a lot of deep respect for what you're doing. It's really tough out there to get the word out about the poisons, poisons in the pantry. And we all know that the poisons in the pantry stem from the poisons in the dirt. So I am ready to get started, but I'll give you just a little bit about me, how I got started. I got started actually almost a decade ago, and I actually was thinking about going to medical school, and one of my dear doctor friends said, "Your voice is way too big, and you are not a big pharma girl." And I'm like, "I'm not. I believe that food can be medicine." And so I got my start at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition as a holistic health coach. It's where I was introduced with Dr. Amen, and it's where I fell in love with the brain. So I did, after graduating IIN, I did go on to become one of his certified brain health coaches, and I literally coach anywhere from 2 all the way up to 72 all across the country. So I'm excited to be speaking with you about what actually had happened a few weeks ago, which kind of relates to what happened to you years ago when you yourself went to the Amen Clinic to do your brain spec. And I think it was an eye opener for you on actually how these dangerous herbicides and pesticides can wreak havoc on our emotional well-being. I am a firm believer that I do not like to use the word anxiety. I do not like the word depression. I feel it is a word that modern day psychiatry labels people so that when they walk out with their prescription, they are then labeled with some type of emotional disorder. We all have emotional ups and downs, especially in the world that we're living in today. You know, with the pandemic of COVID, everything that's going on with the election, we're overwhelmed with, you know, raising small children, having adult children in this world. Like myself, I've got grandchildren. We're all worried and concerned about the poisons in food. So I thank you again for allowing me the time to be on this podcast with you. I'm super excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. You're also a podcaster and you have an amazing podcasting show as well, which we want to talk about at the end here. So thank you for mentioning that about the fact that, you know, medications are the solution as far as conventional medicine goes for mental health challenges. And having been through this myself most of my adult life, I can attest that that was one of the first things 20 years ago when I was going through my own emotional instability was to prescribe a antidepressant. And when they're still doing it today, sadly, and they're not benign. They wreck your gut and they wreck your brain. And so when you're already challenged, you're adding fuel to the fire. And I'm so grateful when I met Laurie, she introduced me to the Amen Clinic. We did some testing. It was an eye opener. It was a relief that they found some things that were, that one particular thing that they found that was not my fault when I realized it. And I did have some, you know, brain issues because I'd had so many concussions and not, you know, concussions that are like, you know, so obvious, but, you know, hitting my head and being in car accidents and then having a bike accident, those things impacted my sweet little brain and I didn't know it. And of course it impacts how you feel about yourself. And then, you know, the thing about mental health is we beat ourselves up when we aren't actually feeling optimal. And we think we're the only ones out there. So I'm going to jump into what happened with me. And then Laurie's going to break it down as to why this gluten cross-contamination I had was so harmful for me. So I'll tell that story briefly. 3 weeks ago, I'd eaten at a restaurant. I got cross-contamination with a gluten-free sandwich that the sales folks finally, or the person who was taking our order knew we were gluten-free, my client and I, but she neglected to say it wasn't a gluten-free environment, which was where this food was being prepared. So it started out with stomach issues with both of us, but mine ended up catapulting into this emotional wreck that I felt like I was angry, I was frustrated, I couldn't focus, I was weepy, I was just emotional and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I thought, well, my stomach's okay. So we thought it was food poisoning at first. Well, it took 4 days before I realized what it was. I was like, oh my goodness, this is gluten poisoning. This is exactly what wheat has always done to me when I had it in excess, or I just have random bouts of this frustration. So anyway, that's what happened. Found out that I was gluten poisoned because the restaurant did confirm that it wasn't safe for me to eat there. And it took, as I said, about 2 weeks, Laurie, before I mentioned I started feeling better, but I'm a week into this and 3 weeks later. So what Laurie's going to do, first thing I want to ask her, we'll do some Q&A, but I wanted to ask her, why is it that it takes so long to get through the system? You talk about that. And what exactly was gluten doing to my brain at that point? Especially since I'd been off of it for almost 10 years now.
Right. Okay. So let's take it back to step one so that your listeners really know and that can understand. So the brain is not fully formed. It's not fully myelinated until somebody is about 25 or 26 years of age. So for the parents out there raising small children, you talked about brain injuries. Brain injuries are very important for the emotional well-being of the brain. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a concussion. So when that brain is not completely formed, it's not completely myelinated, what happens are these toxins end up coming into our gut through the foods we eat, the air we're breathing, and the water that we're drinking. And the herbicides like glyphosate, which is one of the active ingredients in the herbicide known as Roundup, can cross the blood-brain barrier with the science that people like Dr. Stephanie Seneff, Dr. Don Huber, Samsel Adams have shown, because it's water soluble. So what happens then, now we're going to fast forward into really what is happening with wheat. Wheat is one of the #1 grains, besides for soy, corn, sugar beets, alfalfa, and a whole slew more of things that the farmers are growing. So the wheat is highly contaminated with multiple herbicides, not only Roundup, but Liberty and glufosinate. And just to put it in perspective, a majority of the herbicides on the market are owned and manufactured by Bayer, formerly Monsanto. And there have already been lawsuits in the upwards of $2 billion that was a verdict that was guilty. And that actually happened in your state, Suzanne, in Central California. So what happens as these grains like wheat are sprayed with the poisons like Roundup, it permeates the wheat protein. And wheat has different types of proteins. It has things like gluten, which basically gives the wheat the ability to rise, the flour, the ability to rise. And there's also a number of other different types of proteins. So what happens is when people are eating, conventional ground, and also sometimes even if they're organically grown, because genes that you are born with, that you inherit from your parents, either you're going to get two, one from your mom and dad, one from either parent, or sometimes none. Genes matter in this, because what happens is when we have these genetic SNPs, as they are called, if we inherit the wrong ones, it gives us less ability to remove and detox these poisons that are being chemically sprayed on these grains. So when you're eating this wheat, what happens is that your brain ends up consuming about 33% of the calories that we eat, but it absorbs 100% the toxins. And if our methylation genes, the ability to detox, or we're poisoning our guts because maybe we're not aware of the dangers of herbicides, come in contact a lot with parents. We will talk about Roundup. They don't even know the dangers. It's actually kind of sad, but these parents are actually, they've got these small kids running around. They have no idea, and they don't have the time to do the research. I mean, collectively between you and I mean, I probably have over 2,000 hours in studying for all of my certifications. And I know you probably have anywhere from 500 to 1,000 hours. So most parents with younger families don't have that time. So they're feeding their kids, as well as yourself. You went into a restaurant, you asked the right questions. You said, hey, is this gluten-free? They failed to give you informed consent that, listen, we could have cross-contamination, which sounds like it did. And then what ends up happening is you ate this bread thinking it's gluten-free. They failed to give you the answer, and then right away you started getting stomach issues. So when you get some of these problems and it immediately starts to affect your gut, and again, it's going to affect your brain because your brain's consuming 100% of those toxins. The IgA markers that a leaky gut test, and we'll talk more about that, it triggers IgA, which means that you were contaminated when you ate it. Your body started creating these antibodies, and the IgA markers can last up to 14 days when you take a test. When it goes longer than that, let's just say 6 months down the line, it doesn't mean that your body is automatically has eliminated the poison, because sometimes it could take upwards of a year or 2 years, because we've been absorbing these toxins since 9 months before we were born. But the IgG markers actually are the longer term markers. They could be up to 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, that when you do this test, it measures it in your blood. So, and then there's a certain type of a wheat protein. It's called the prodynorphin. It's PRODYNORPHIN. And that prodynorphin can actually attach to the opiate receptors, the same way that alcohol and drugs attach to the opiate receptors. And it brings you into this downward spiral of anxious thoughts, overwhelmed thoughts, negative thoughts, sad thoughts. It could even it could be a cause of bipolar, schizophrenia, mania, over 100 other autoimmune diseases out there, because it causes inflammation in the gut, which means that your brain also has inflammation.
Laurie, that's fantastic. You're so detailed oriented. I'm trying to write this down. And our guest, Elaine just mentioned, she said, this is great content. Are politicians and medical folks hearing any of these important ideas? And we know that conventional doctors, some do, but most don't. And that's what RFK's been talking about. You know, if he would stay on track and talk about the right things instead of getting off the way he has, but he's only one of the few politicians out there that's running for president, to say that our foods are killing us. And toxins are a big part of that. And that a lot of these issues that we are having is from our diet. And another thing too, Laurie, I've been touching with my community about lectins and the harm of these grains that are the corn, the soy, the wheat, you know, the barley, the everything that's in all of our processed foods. They are not organic most of the time. And that's why they're cheap. They're priced that they are because they are full of chemicals, but you're also getting whammied with these lectins that harm our gut already, because a lot of them are just, they're not processed properly or prepared properly. Beans are another one. And so we've got that on top of what you just mentioned, that they're being sprayed and they're non-GMO. That's why so many of us now are talking about non-GMOs are harming us, and non-organics. And sadly, we are getting the toxins, the organic foods are getting sprayed as well. And that's why it's so important to wash them and to clean them. You can't get well, the GMO foods, as we know, and non-organic, they have these ingredients in them buried they're in the seeds. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but that's what was that you get this double whammy, and then it affects your emotional health, and then you feel like you're broken, and you go to a doctor and you ask for help, and they say, well, they don't even ask you what you're eating, and then they say, well, how about an antidepressant? Or they go test for, they go to a psychiatrist and they get tested for bipolar. And there's a lot of these diagnoses right now that they're being misdiagnosed, and they're being pumped full of medication.
Agreed.
So thank you for that. And I think the other question was, you know, for me, the question was, you talked about this opioid receptor. Let's talk a little bit about what that does to our serotonin. Why did I feel so crappy by just, you know, who knows how much gluten I got into me? If it was also in the bread, because we know that gluten-free products are also cross-contamination, or was it just in the kitchen, which was being surrounded by flour and other products that have gluten? But how much I had in me, does that impact it? Or can you have just a little bit and it throws you off? Because I eat out all the time. So I know
I look at eating out as, how much do you want to microdose poison?
yes,
I'm in Utah. There are literally 3 restaurants I feel comfortable eating. One is owned by somebody from Italy, and he has got one of the best Italian restaurants in the state of Utah. All of his stuff comes from, you know, Italy. But to put that out there, Italy actually just allowed herbicides like Roundup and these GMOs. So they've fought for decades on not, you know, having them in their country. And so people felt comfortable when they traveled to Italy, and they would say, listen, I just got back from Europe. I can eat the bread. I don't have the stomach issues, but they just allowed that. So I'm just going to put that out there. When this prodynorphin attaches to an opiate receptor, genetics plays a little bit of a role. I mean, I don't know, your listeners may have heard, that the genes load the gun, but the environmental factors pull the trigger. And what are those environmental factors? It's things like gluten. It's stuff like soybean. And everybody is made up genetically different because everybody has different DNA. And if you've inherited the wrong genes from your parents, what happens when somebody does eat the wheat that's attached to the opiate receptor, it's going to affect people differently. Again, their emotional brain is tied to the types of genetics, but it's also tied to how long have they been feeding their brain this poison.
Right.
And we talk about, so amino acids, let's spend a minute on this. Amino acids are what your body does not make. There are 21 amino acids. And if you think of amino acids, they're kind of like the strand, and they come from protein foods. It's harder to get amino acids if you're a vegan. It's a little bit easier if you're a vegetarian, because vegetarians at least eat eggs. It's easier if people do eat grass-fed, grass-finished beef, if they are eating organic turkey, if they are eating wild-caught fish. But the thing that people really have to remember, it's the microdosing of the poison and how quickly and effectively you can get it out of your body. And if you're constantly consuming these conventional grown foods, and we all know that even the GMOs, it's a step better. So any of the parents out there who are on a tight budget, non-GMO is way better than conventional.
Right.
But like you said, even organic is not really 100% of the answer. We're seeing a lot of, I don't know, out in California, I'm sure you're seeing this on the packaging of dairy products and eggs and cottage cheese and stuff, regenerative farming. Basically, regenerative farming are the farmers who are not using any herbicides or pesticides. They're doing things to the soil to make the soil healthy. And that is really where the food industry needs to go.
Well, and
But
Laurie,
when
on that comment, I just want to mention here, because we need to watch our time a little bit, is that, and you've so much to share, we're going to have you back and dive deeper, is that don't forget that these products that you're consuming, let's just say that it's not just gluten, it's all the other processed foods that you're consuming that have chemicals in them. And what Laurie's talking about is our bodies get burdened by these toxins, and your liver, your detox organs can't process it fast enough. And so when you get like another, like even for me with this issue I had, for whatever reason, my immune system, I was off kilter because it really affected me badly. And the only thing I could think of, because I eat out a lot and I know that I'm careful, that there was a triple whammy of gluten in this product. Whatever it was I ate was totally whammied with it. And so that's what threw me off kilter. But that's why we have to talk about toxic burden loads, and why are my poisons in the pantry ebook, and why Laurie and I are doing this on this crusade about glyphosate, because glyphosate is in everybody's. If you go test, you have glyphosate in your system. And
it's in the water, Suzanne. That's the sad thing. We've been doing a lot of water testing, and most people aren't even testing their home units, especially like the reverse osmosis, because most reverse osmoses aren't taking glyphosate, and the municipalities in these cities and towns of these different states, they don't have to test for glyphosate. So even if somebody like switched over to all organic, or regenerative farming, took out the seed oils, which you are so deeply passionate about educating your viewers,
Mhm.
it's still coming in through the water systems because the farmers spray it. It goes down into the ground. It goes into the aqueducts. The aquifers are like just bringing the water from town to city, from town to city. They're not legally obligated to test it. And then you go into these restaurants and then people are drinking the water. Well, what else do you find besides glyphosate? Arsenic,
Mhm.
cadmium, mercury, lead. Why? Because these herbicides and pesticides also contain these heavy metals. And, we talk about organic and we look at all the chemtrails, especially in the wineries, the Napa. But
Right.
I love a good bottle of a glass of wine. I will not drink any wine out of California. Why? Because look at the forest fires that happened in Napa and Sonoma. What did they do? You had all the planes. God only knows what is in what they're spraying to
Right.
put the fire out.
Right. Well, and that's again, this is the reason why we're doing what we're doing, Laurie, is we're educating and inspiring folks to not go down the rabbit hole of depression and anxiety where they think, well, everything is doomed, because that's not what we're trying to get the message here. But people are using a lot of foods that are not, they're your poison, and
Right.
alcohol being one of them, and certain, when you just have to pay attention. And my main message here is, and Laurie and I both feel that there's lots of great companies out there doing great work where they're bringing in products that are cleaner, that are healthier, that don't have all these chemicals and don't have all these ingredients. So when people say, oh, but I only eat Nabisco cookies once in a while, or I only eat these big name brand foods once in a while, and it's like, well, it's once in a while too much. You
Right.
need
And
to, yeah, because we're so polluted with, we just can't afford to just do in moderation anymore. We have to just be hyper vigilant. And one other comment on that, Laurie, the reason why I say that is because when we stop buying those products, those companies are forced to either change or they go out of business. And
exactly.
that's my dream, is that I can walk into any grocery store, any kid can, and even if it's a piece of candy and it's organic sugar, it's still sugar. But the point of it is, it doesn't have all those processed chemicals and those additives and fillers that are adding to the fire that we already have in our systems. And that's what Laurie and I are trying to emphasize here, is it is that important to read ingredients. It is that important to get tested. It is that important to know where you are with your health, especially, Laurie, if you have slews of symptoms: chronic pain, skin issues, mental health issues. Laurie, what are some others that are like
You
so?
know what? So let's go back to the amino acids that you can only get from protein foods. And so you think of all of the cows, the chickens, they're feeding on all of these grains. Well, we know that soil is no longer soil for conventional farming. It's actually dirt. So tryptophan is actually a really important, and this really applies for you. Why were you kind of feeling that you couldn't gear shift off of, a sad or negative thought? So tryptophan actually is an essential amino acid that your body can't make. So when you're eating these plants and you're eating the farm animals that are grazing on these plants, and soil is dirt, there is very little tryptophan in what we're finding nowadays with the food. So what is tryptophan? Tryptophan is the amino acid that actually converts to 5-HTP, which actually converts to serotonin, a neurotransmitter, a very important calming neurotransmitter in your brain. What does serotonin do? Serotonin prevents you, when you are deficient, from being able to gear shift off of a negative thought, an anxious thought, an overwhelming thought. And that is when moms, dads, teenagers, and listen, there's a huge uptick in suicide right now. They
Right.
end up going into their conventional medicine doctor. And not all conventional medicine doctors are doing this. Most of them, they never really go back to learn about the brain, and let alone go back to learn about like food being poison. But what happens is that person then walks out with a prescription for an SSRI, which is an anxiety medication. And I hate that word. It's a depression medication. And I hate that word. That's because their doctor has labeled them that, oh, it's okay, honey. You probably have a little bit of anxiety right now. Oh, you probably got a little depression because maybe you're overwhelmed with 2 kids or 5 kids or 8 kids. Why don't you take this antidepressant? Instead of going to the root cause, which is the gut and the lack of amino acids. How about coming back and saying, listen, let's give you some 5-HTP. Why? Because serotonin is a neurotransmitter in your brain. Let's give you GABA. Why? Because GABA is a calming neurotransmitter in your brain. 95% of your serotonin is made in the gut. And when wheat, which is sandpaper, wreaks havoc on a cell membrane, think of sandpaper, and your tight junctions around the digestive tract that houses 80% of your immune system breaks open, guess what? Those toxins leak in and out, leaking out into the bloodstream. Where is the blood carried? Every organ, including your brain. But doctors don't go back to root cause saying, hey, let's do a 7-day or a 14-day or a 21-day elimination diet. Let's take out the wheat. Let's take out the dairy. Let's take out the corn. Let's take out the soy. Have you looked at red dyes and yellow dyes in your kids' diet? No. They think that big pharma is the answer. And you and I look at as food as medicine or poison.
Yes. And also with that message about not looking at root causes, they're not looking at the symptoms, Laurie. So the symptoms, we know that if you read my Poisons in the Pantry ebook, I have specific symptoms that are, that we all are experiencing right now, from mental health to gut issues to chronic obesity to heart disease. All of those are in there. And ironically, what causes it are exactly the same things. So when you're paying attention to what those things are, which are the ingredients that we just talked about, and also these poisons, which my ebook does touch on glyphosate. It does talk about why we're having so many issues when big pharma knows this, big medicine knows this, big FDA knows about this. I mean, I've got a doctor, Dr. Kate Shanahan, who I used most of my research from her book. And she's blown the whistle on the fact that they all know this because it's profits over people. And one other thing, Laurie has a great doctor that she's very good friends with and has him on often on her podcast, which we do need to wrap up, and we'll share where you can watch some of these episodes that she has already been speaking about and goes on for much longer. You can really dive in deeply. Dr. Richard Fleming, one of the things he says about processed foods, as the ingredients that are in there are chemicals and they're processed foods, that means they have to have a long shelf life. And he says it extends the lifetime of the product, but does not extend the lifetime of the person. It actually harms the person. So we're doing things, that's where the profits over people come in. We are basically just enlightening and informing you to pay attention, to read ingredients, to know what's going on so that you can make informed decisions. And again, supporting companies. If you read these ingredients and you know they're bad for you, don't buy them. Just don't. And then go to the product
let me add something that in. Go to the store manager and let them know that, listen, you need to carry more non-GMO and more organics, and let them know until they're going to change the products that they're stocking in their store, that you're going to boycott their store.
Well, and the other thing too is that, you go to the alternative milks. That's the number one question I get asked is what alternative milks are safe out there? There are 2 companies. 2 in California. We are like the leader in products, and there's only 2. It's Malk, and there's 3 trees. And all they have is 3 ingredients. If it's a nut, they have the nut, they have water, and they have some salt. And you don't need all that other stuff that's in all of those milks, that alternative milks that are so harmful. And people are drinking them by the dozens. They're getting off of dairy thinking they're being healthier. Actually, it's more harmful. So that's what's in my ebook and why I've done it. So people will read it. But Laurie, sadly, people have the ingredients. They have the book, and they're saying that they're doing it in baby steps. They can't do it all at once. And I'm like, you really don't have time. You really don't have time. You've got issues. You got to get moving on it. And so trying to be optimistic, and Laurie and I are really passionate about helping you. We can help you if you need to do testing. Laurie is phenomenal with the lab testing, and she does a lot of stuff pro bono, and it's really just to get you on the right path. So Laurie, why don't we wrap this up with a few last words and tell me where people can find you, and especially your podcast.
Okay. And actually we interviewed you, so our interview was really good, but they can find me. My website is stopsprayingglyphosate.com. Glyphosate is spelled Glyphosate. And glyphosate actually is one of the active ingredients in Roundup, which is known to cause cancer, non-Hodgkin's. There's hundreds of lawsuits all across the country. Guilty verdicts, the biggest one so far is $2 billion to a farming couple in Central California. They can also find me on Thursdays from 4 to 6 Mountain Time. So for your viewers, if they're in California, that would be 3 to 5 Pacific Time. The name of that website is kmmu.org or mainstreetmediautah.org. And that's where you can find me, always talking about health, immune health, the brain, the gut, and how these poisonous foods are harming our bodies, harming our children, harming our grandchildren, harming our great-grandparents, harming our grandparents. And we want to plant the seed that we are here for your journey, and that any questions, there's never a dumb question. It's just the question that needs to be asked. So feel free to send Suzanne your question. I'd be happy to answer anything. If it relates to the brain gut, I'm always available. And thank you, Suzanne, for allowing me this time today to speak with you on your podcast. I love the work that you're doing. So keep doing it, my friend, and have a happy Easter.
Thank you, Laurie. I really appreciate that. And again, I just posted to Elaine, who's our one visitor here today. I'm so happy she stayed with us, that you and I will do a free consult with her, get together and talk. If she's got any health questions, we love to fill you full of great information and to support you on your wellness journey. And anybody that's watching the recording later, same thing. We're always available to reach out. Catch us while you can now before we get so busy, but we're always available there to answer these questions, specifically when it has to do with your specific situation, to get you on the right track, because that's it. We've got simple steps. We can do those tests, but the most important part is getting you to understand how important it is for you to spread the word. We need help. We need advocates to help us do this work we're doing. So the more you know, the more you can share it with your family and your community. And Laurie talked about our family and our children and our offspring and everybody that we're talking about as humans, but don't forget the animals that are being polluted right now that need us, and the environment. This is all impacting our environment. If you look at what the resource, go into a grocery store and look at the rows and rows and rows of food in these stores, and I'd say 90% of them I have to walk by. I wouldn't buy them. And they're harming us, and they're harming the environment and our bodies and our brains. Remember, a healthy gut means a healthy brain. If your gut's not healthy, your brain's not healthy. And we can't make informed choices, and we can't do our work here on this planet to thrive and live well. So again, I'm so happy to have had you here, Laurie, to this first Secrets to Radiant Health launch. I can't wait to have more conversations with you. And we're going to probably rock this one again with viewers, because you are always so full of information. And let's do this again soon. I really am happy to have you here. Happy Easter, an appropriate time for us, both being spiritual queens here. We love spreading the gospel of good health. And I'm so happy to have you here with me today on your time. All right, honey.
All right.
Nice to talk to you and see you. Until next time.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.